Hello, everybody. So, welcome. I think we're all now gathered. There's a Tim still to join in, and I think there's 18 of us. Good Lord, I'll just admit all. Do you want to keep an eye on that?
Yeah.
So hopefully Amanda can now take care of the admitting people to the waiting room responsibilities, and we can start off. So look, thank you all so much for joining. It's great fun that you're joining us for this first of our mini bottle tastings. We thought of the idea about 2 weeks ago, ordered some bottles off the internet, tested them to make sure that they were good quality and didn't make the wine taste funny, and then sent some bottles out to a bunch of you. And I think there are at least 7 or 8 households, some of you with 2 bottles each, because there's a couple with the tasting together. And I've just ordered another 200 bottles. So in the future, we'll be able to do this again with a larger number of people, but you're the kind of the test group. We also do have a handful of our wine club members who are people who have recently bought wine from us and had it shipped to them. Now, I hope you've all got at least 1 bottle of the wines that we're tasting beside you, and you can taste along with that. If you've opened 4 full bottles, then good luck to you. I hope you've got a few friends around this weekend. Probably worth saying, open bottles do actually survive much longer than you think. You do not have to drink them that night. You can put the cork back in, put it back in the fridge door, and a day or 2 or 3 days later, it'll be perfectly fine if you've just taken out 1 glass. So don't worry about that if you want to open a bottle or 2 more. But welcome everybody. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just talk for a little bit about who we are and how we set up and what we're all about, because quite a few people with us are actually new to us and haven't perhaps tasted our wines before, don't know much about us. Now, I know that some of the wine club members sitting there probably do know this, and they've probably heard it a few times, but forgive me if we just repeat ourselves. I'm also going to see if I can show you some photographs and share my screen with you so that you can see where we are and get a little bit of a visual image about who we are and what we do. Let me just take you back to 2003. So I was working as a wine buyer for Sainsbury's. I'd been there a couple of years. I'd travelled around to quite a few winemaking areas, and in my previous life, I had worked as a winemaker. I did 3 years of cellar rat work, assistant winemaker work, where you're the lowest of the low in a cellar, doing the menial tasks, doing the cleaning, doing the digging out of the red wine tanks, and it's great fun. But I learnt a lot. But at the end of that period, I thought I should get a proper job. I'd met Amanda by that stage, so she was based in England. I thought I'd better stay in England and get some proper work. So I did do that, and but I had my idea that one day I wanted to make my own wine, and I really didn't know how. I didn't have any money, didn't have a business plan, but I had this romantic dream that it might happen if we wanted it enough. And we went on holiday quite often to wine regions, funnily enough. Anyone in the wine business probably is familiar with that desire to go and visit nice places, and normally I can squeeze in at least 1 winery visit, maybe 2 on a week-long holiday. As long as they're interesting wineries. So we went to the south of France, and we absolutely fell in love with it. And it's turned out, this is October half term, we came back with our 5-year-old son. We had a lovely week out there, and we came back fired up with the desire to own a vineyard. And then 2 months later, I got a call from the English guys in the village of Maury to say they'd found a vineyard and it was for sale, and did we want to buy it? So I jumped on a plane. I think it was probably February. I was standing in a vineyard in the middle of this cold, windy valley with vines with no leaves on them, standing looking at these vines thinking, well, shall I buy it or shall I not? And I decided to, which is one of those decisions that really wasn't rational. It wasn't driven by a business plan or any thought. It was just, we've got enough money in the bank to buy this little vineyard. It's very small. Let's just buy it and see what happens. So that's how it all started. Now I'm going to show you where. Now at this point, I'm going to test the technology a bit. I'm going to share my screen. And if I'm right, I should be able to find the right presentation, which is Google Earth. So if I share my Google Earth screen, I hope that you can all see that well enough. You can possibly see the whole, and I think you can just see the screen I've demonstrated. So what we are here, we're looking at France, we're looking at the southern part of France. I'm going to zoom out a bit to show you the whole of Europe, well, the whole of France anyway. So this is where we are. Now, down in the south of France, I hope that if I roll my mouse around, you can see that. So from the border with Italy here, Monaco, all the way along here, this is Provence. Then we turn into the Languedoc, and then the Languedoc goes all the way around to here, and then this bottom bit here is the Roussillon. So when we talk about the south of France, people are thinking about this area and along the Pyrenees to Toulouse and Pau and Biarritz on this side here. So this is the south of France. And I'm going to zoom in a bit further to talk about the Languedoc-Roussillon. So you can see in shot now quite nicely from Nîmes, which is the edge of the Rhone, all this swathe of vineyards along here. Most of the little the pale areas you can see are actually vineyards, fields of any sort, but the main crop down there is grapes. So all this area up to Carcassonne, Castelnaudary, Limoux, that is all the Languedoc, up to Montpellier and around a little bit further on towards Nîmes. And then there's quite a bit of a gap. This area here of mountains with a few vineyards is the Corbière. And then the bit below where it says Carignan, where I'm drawing a line with my mouse here, if you can see that, that is the border between the Languedoc and the Roussillon. So the Roussillon region where we are is this wedge of land. I'll sort of draw it out for you when we get a bit closer. So here's the Spanish border down along here. Can you just nod if you're all following my mouse well enough to see what's going on? Okay, I'm getting some nods, which is great. So Spanish border here. This is the port of Collioure and Banyuls, the famous, where the Pyrenees go down to the sea, beautiful rocky mountainous coast. And then there's the sandy coast here with the bay of Perpignan. And Perpignan is in this wedge of land here, which is flat in between three rivers. There's the Agly, the Tete, and the Tech. And this area is the Roussillon, this whole area around here. And the grapes grow on the plain of Perpignan, in the southern area around Serré and Tuire, a little bit up towards Île-sur-Tête, around Rivesaltes. And then there's this northern section up here in the foothills. And this is where we're interested in. This is the Agly Valley and the northern part of the Roussillon, which is where we think the quality and the excitement is mostly to be found in our area. So where we first went on holiday, I'm just going to zoom in a bit more here, was the little town of Carignan. And that is here, which if you can see below it is a range of really quite steep mountains, very sharp rocky cliffs. And as you drive over from Carignan, you drive into the Roussillon. And that Carignan is in the Corbière, and this boundary here is the boundary between the Corbière and the Roussillon. And this valley where Maury sits, and the hills to the side of it here are the Agly Valley. And the River Agly actually flows down here through this lake and then back out here again. But this is where we think the best quality in the Roussillon is, and this is what we fell in love with. The crosses on the map are my vineyards. And
yours?
Our vineyards. Our vineyards. I always forget. Yes, Amanda owns half of them. And also our house and the place we make our wine. So what we're going to do is just have a little zoom around there. I'm going to switch to 3D. I might zoom in a bit more actually. Around, let's go to the Laroque vineyard. I hope you can see this well enough. If I go to the 3D view, it'll automatically take us around and you can see the terrain. You can see that the valley of Maury is quite a steep-sided valley, and there's this big rocky escarpment on the one side and an even bigger rocky escarpment on the other side, which isn't showing us. And you can see that the whole area, all these little fields around, are basically vineyards. It's a monoculture of grapes. It was a famous region for fortified wine production and dry red wine production. And pretty much every field you can see there was a vineyard. Nowadays, some of them are being ripped out and just left to go fallow because it's a tough life being a grape grower now. You can see this ridge of limestone rocks going straight up there. And there's one on the other side as well. Let's just stop the 3D animation, go back to a map. And I'm just going to zoom over here as well, because I'm rather enjoying this 3D stuff. So,
really cool.
Let's just switch back to that. So this is one of those mountains escarpments. Come on. There we go. And you can see that's Carignan, wow, top there, and there's a really tall mountain ridge. These are probably 500-600 meters tall, these peaks, and the bottom of the valley floor is about 100-150 meters. So I hope that gives you a kind of idea of the dramatic scenery and why we fell in love with it. Now we're going to just scoot back to the vineyard blocks. If we go back to 2D, zoom out a bit. Here we have the village of Maury, our three vineyards, Laroque, Kundoa, and back to Genèvre. And this is the winery where we make our wine. And then a little while ago, we bought a little tiny house here, which we won't go into too much detail, but I'm going to go into the Kundoa vineyard, which is the first one we bought. And we'll look at that in a little bit of detail, and then we'll move on to the wine, because I think it's probably time. So why is that not zooming in? So I'm going to zoom in manually. See this little vineyard here? It looks a little bit like a fist that's giving you the finger. That entirely unintentional. Didn't try and buy a vineyard that was swearing at you, but that is what it's appearing to do. And if we zoom in a bit closer, you can see actually individual vines. This is what I love about the magic of this technology. So you can see in the finger up here, there are no vines, and that's partly because we had, 1 year, I counted the number of baskets of grapes we got from this entire block, and it was 10 baskets, so about 120 kilos of grapes. And honestly, it was hardly worth bothering farming it, so we decided to rip those vines out. And this little section here, down at the bottom of a steep hill, didn't get any tractor love. Tractors couldn't get down there, it was too steep. So we also abandoned that bit and ripped it out. But the rest, you can see the vines are there. There's a tractor row every 4th or 5th row, so we can get between the vines to spray them. The vineyard above, which isn't ours, has got a tractor row every 10th row. And it's really hard to treat the ones in the middle of these rows here. So we found that actually by ripping out the middle row, we had a much better and more effective treatment of our vineyards. And you can see how many of the vines are missing or just not really thriving. This is early summer, so green growth is happening. Where there's no green growth, the vine's either dead or very, very tiny and hard to see from a satellite. So that gives you, this is our oldest vineyard, and we'll taste the wine from that vineyard last. That's from the Lejeune cuvée, which we make from this vineyard. So I hope that gives you an idea of where we are. I won't show you both other vineyards because it's a geeky, you know, I love it. Maybe some of you might be tapping your fingers on the desk going, when are we going to taste some wine? Let's quickly move to the winery. So we don't have a winery. We're not rich enough. We bought 3 little vineyard blocks. We poured a lot of money into just 3 years of farming before we sold anything. We don't have the money to produce, to buy a vineyard, to buy a winery and to equip it. So we work in my friend Jean-Marc's cellar. He is at a winery called Chateau Saint-Roch, and that is this place here. Now, I just stuck a few photographs here, which you may or may not be able to see. They're slightly impressionistic, just to give you an idea of what goes on in the winery. They may be too small to really see. This is a sorting table with some of the guys who help us out with our sorting. This is the end of vintage barbecue. Now, I should hasten to add, this is for all of Jean-Marc's 35 hectares that he farms around this vineyard, this winery. Our 4 hectares are just added on to his and treated like his. So we pick them, you know, in sync. But this is his harvest party.
There might be people trying to get in.
Let's just see. Yes, there are. Sorry.
There you go.
2 folk who may have been waiting a while. So, Nigel and Mark, sorry you've been waiting a while.
We won't hear you yet.
If you can hear me, sorry you've been waiting a while. We've just been doing a virtual tour of the vineyards, and here's Pal as well. So a few of our wine club members are arriving a little on the late side, but very nice you could join us, and sorry to keep you waiting.
Sorry to be late.
No, that's fine. Nice to see you. Yep. So yeah, here we are. And again, there's more photographs on the website. I probably don't want to bore you here with too many pictures, but this is the winery where we make our wine, and we make our wine in open top barrels, our reds in open top barrels, and we ferment them and punch them down. And I'm there 5 or 6 weeks every autumn. But I think probably now a quarter of an hour has passed, and we haven't nary a drop has touched our lips. So I'm going to pour. I'm going to switch away from the screen view, stop screen sharing. Here I have the bottle of Field of the Bee, which I'm going to pour for Amanda. Now I'm really interested to know from all of you whether you think these have come out tasting the way they should. I will use this technology. I have ordered 200 more of these bottles. I do think they work okay, but theoretically they were cleaned by me. They were brand new, super cleaned extra by me, and then filled with wine. There shouldn't be any oxidation, or there should be a tiny bit of oxidation when you fill the bottle up, but these wines should be vigorous and young enough with enough sulfur to survive that. So hopefully they should be absolutely as they should be. I'm just going to compare that with this one. Yep, that smells fine.
Ooh.
Just a bit of wine on my keyboard, double-handed swirling. So here we are tasting Field of the Bee. Now, I alluded to the fact that our vineyards, our 4 hectares, are pretty much all red grapes. And for the first few years, we only made our Domaine of the Bee red and our occasional production of our single vineyard red Lejeune. It struck me from feedback from our customers that people would really love to have a white wine to taste from time to time. So we talked to Jean-Marc. So we don't have enough, we have a few white vines amid our reds. And we don't have the money yet to buy a white wine vineyard for ourselves. And also, most crucially, red wine can be made really quite simply and artisanally with very basic equipment. White wine really needs much more modern equipment. It needs cooling, it needs stainless steel, it needs ultra cleanliness, lots of a really good press to stop any form of oxidation. All those things are expensive. All those things Jean-Marc has extremely good equipment, and we don't. So we said to Jean-Marc, would he help us create a white wine? And he has a wide variety of lovely vineyards around the Roussillon, including some vineyards with 100-year-old vines of Grenache Gris and Grenache Blanc. And he lets us play with some of the material from those vineyards. He is really the winemaker, and we basically take some of the wines that he's making and blend a little bit for us to bottle as Field of the Bee and our Rosé as Bee Pink. So I'm really crediting Jean-Marc with being the winemaker for these wines. We do have it in our plan to buy a white wine vineyard at one point. Nearly got close to buying one this year, but there's a question of fundraising and a question of how we get it farmed and quite a few practicalities that we need to get solved before we can take that step. And obviously being a tiny little business, it's quite a big step to do that. So we haven't done it yet, but this is a white I think hopefully we could replicate if we were able to.
Who's got it?
Hopefully, well, I know that 7 or 8 households have got the mini bottles, and the rest of you maybe have a glass of white. But if you're holding on to your bottle of red, thinking you're going to just drink that tonight, you're going to have to put up with us tasting white without you. So sorry about that, folks. So what's it like? I don't think it's really helpful if I spend too long describing things to you, because first of all, I think describing wine is very personal. And while the wine industry believes you need to have a language of wine tasting, is a kind of shared language, it's very rare to get people noticing exactly the same smells and flavors in a wine sort of spontaneously. I've tasted this wine a few times. I definitely quite often have a sort of white peach character. When I was a young lad in Yorkshire, our neighbours had a greenhouse and they had a white peach tree. And I just remember really intensely the smell of that fresh white peach plucked off a greenhouse tree. And there's something of that, I think, in this wine. I sometimes also get a bit of pineapple, nice fresh pineapple in the riper years. Amanda's shaking her head, she's not finding any pineapple. And sometimes a little bit of citrus peel. So all of those things you may find, or you may just think it smells like nice white wine, which is probably where a lot of people will go. There's a little bit of oak with this wine, but only about 20%. So it's very much in the background. Anyone who noticed oak when they smelt it, they've got a very acute sense of smell. It is there, but it's not very strong, I don't think. So we've got very old vines. We've got Grenache Gris and Grenache Blanc. We've got very cool fermentation, very modern, precise fermentation with no oxidation. Everything done really, really cleanly to express the fruit flavors. And then we've got a little bit of oak aging for some component just to give you a bit of richness. What we're trying to achieve from our point of view, what I'm sort of working with Jean-Marc to achieve, is a style of wine that's really pleasing to most people, that isn't very oaky and rich and buttery, but equally isn't really lean and skinny and green and acidic. Somewhere in the middle, it's a lovely hedonistic, peachy, delicious mouthful that's really great in the garden, really great all summer. And actually this wine lasts, 2, 3, 4 years in the bottle quite happily. Some people I know actually really like keeping their Field of the Bee for a couple of years because they think it develops positive characters. For me, it changes. I love it when it's young. I like it when it's old, but I prefer it in the first 18 months. But that's my opinion, and you're all welcome to make up your own.
Yeah.
We do have a question here. What percentage is in the blend? So roughly 80% is the blend of Grenache Gris and Grenache Blanc. And it's sometimes quite hard to be precise about how much of each goes into each that component, because they're often co-planted, or the vines are a bit mixed in the vineyard, and often you end up picking a bit of Grenache Gris with some Grenache Blanc and putting them together. So it's hard to be sure exactly, but we normally say it's about 50-50, maybe 60-40 Grenache Gris to Grenache Blanc. And then the remaining 20%, this year I think it's about 20% is Roussanne, which is a grape that grows very well, and we feel it just adds a little bit of richness and has perhaps apricot peach flavour to the wine. So yeah, that's the blend.
I think maybe if people have questions,
probably is a good time to. Well, actually, I think honestly we could probably risk unmuting at this point, and leave yourself unmuted unless an aeroplane goes by. If it gets too much, I'll perhaps suggest you mute again. One thing to watch out for is keyboard noises. If you're tapping the table, or you can sometimes be making noises that we can all hear that you can't tell. So if we can identify that, we might remute a few people. Anyone got any questions about this one? I know you're all there. You're looking at me.
We're still all muted. Everyone's muted.
Yes, but I don't know if anyone's got any comments, just unmute yourself. If you,
I see.
remind yourself how to unmute yourself, go to the bottom left.
Unmute us.
Yeah, just unmute and ask a question, and then if no questions, we'll move on to the next wine.
Or tell us what you can taste. Surely.
We haven't got
Absolutely. Questions or comments? We don't just need questions.
Yeah, we haven't got the white, I'm afraid. So.
Sorry to hear that. I know one of the sets of samples that we sent out hasn't arrived. So Jonathan, I think, sadly said he couldn't join us because he hadn't received them. But we are recording this. It is it is going to be recorded. We will post it on our timeline on the website so that people who want to see it afterwards can see it. Also, potentially, people who want to order sets of wines that, when we're not actually running a tasting, can watch this as a way of catching up on how the wines taste and who we are, and what we think of them. So your questions may be immortalised. If you want to say something now that's extremely clever, please go ahead.
Hi Justin, it's Alex.
Hi Alex, how are you?
Everyone. Just on the tasting, when I tasted it earlier on, that's the only one I'm trying tonight, by the way. I detected mainly raspberry, a bit of sour cherry, and just a comment from my side. I don't believe in the aging potential of the wine. I think I'm more with you. I think this needs to be consumed within 12 to 18 months.
Yep. Well, I'm with you on that. Although there are some people who do, as I said, who do like aging it. Interesting suggestion you make. You mentioned a couple of fruits that are actually red fruits. Now, there's a bit of an interesting survey that was done in Bordeaux of a guy who took some students of wine who knew a bit about wine tasting, and he asked them all to sit down in a room, taste a wine, and then write down on a card he'd pre-prepared, and he put lots of different fruits on the card, and he put little boxes beside them and said, tick all the fruits that you think you can taste in this wine. So they all had a white wine, they all smelt it, and they all sat down and wrote down, some of them ticked apples, some of them ticked pears, some of them ticked peaches. They ticked away lots and lots of fruits. And then he brought them back in and he gave them a red wine. And he said, right, now please taste this, and tick the fruits. And they all ticked raspberries and red currants and cherries and various other red fruits. And at the end, he revealed he'd actually given them exactly the same wine. He just put some red food colouring into it. So now I think some of these flavours, you often get flavours from dark coloured fruits in white wine, but you kind of discount them from your mental lexicon because you think it's a white wine. I can't mention strawberries. And likewise, you can get, Sauvignon Blanc often smells of black currants, actually blackcurrant leaf particularly, and there's a compound in them which are very similar. So yes, cherries, I think it's got quite a good one there. And anyone else got any observations about this wine before we move on to the rosé?
Hello, good evening, Justin. I'm Konstantinos. Sorry.
Hi, Konstantinos, nice to see you.
The screen says Galaxy 10. Sorry, I don't know how to fix that. I would like to ask you, please. On 2017, that I'm trying, I have noticed that there were only 1,100 bottles of the domain of the field of the. May I ask about this year? How many bottles there will be? Is it going to be any larger production?
About 1,400 bottles.
Thank you.
And we actually shipped over just about 1,000 litres. So we had a difficulty this year. Normally our wine is bottled in France, as you would expect. This year, so we also normally, because we have lots of little production wines, we normally call a bottling truck with a nice small bottling line to come and bottle it for us. And we get all 5 or 6 wines that we're making bottled in one day if we can. On this particular occasion, the bottling truck cancelled. They just, as soon as the lockdown came along in France, they said, right, the next 30 days of bottling wiped out. We're just blocking everything out, not going to do any bottling, which is a disaster for us because we thought, how are we ever going to have any wine to sell for the summer? So we rapidly came up with an alternative solution, which is to ship them to the UK. And we shipped them in 1,000 litre containers. So in a bulk container on a pallet, filled up, it's like a giant bag-in box. We filled it right up, preserved it with sulphur, shipped it across and bottled it in the UK. So we brought 1,000 litres across. You lose a few. I think we ended up with 1,360 something bottles from this vintage. And the rosé about 2,400 bottles. So we're making a little bit more every year because the demand is there and because Jean-Marc has the flexibility to allow us to take a little more each year if we need to. So we're really making as much as we think we can sell in a calendar year.
Thank you very much.
No, pleasure.
And look, Tim says
drinking is that 15? This is when I have to get my glasses out and confess that I can't read that properly.
15.
2015. So Tim, you're on the 15. Oak and pineapple notes and peach. So those would exaggerate, would come out more. Yeah, are you enjoying it?
Yes.
And did you consciously keep it that long, or did you find it in the back of your fridge? He's talking, but we can't hear him. You'll have to unmute Tim if you're going to say anything.
That's it.
Yep.
No, we found it in the back of a box in the cellar, yeah.
Well, sometimes you have a happy accident where you keep something much longer than you intended to, and it turns out to be delicious. So I have got, and one day we will do a vertical tasting of, I think 13 was the first vintage we made of the white. So it'd be quite interesting to line them up and have a tasting. And the geekier among you might want to come along to that as and when we do it. Or we could even do the small bottle version of it. If this really takes off, then there's no reason at all why we shouldn't parcel out the tiny stocks we've got left of a few things and make little baby bottle tastings and send them out to people who taste them in the comfort of their own home. So I think it's probably time to move on to the rosé.
Was there another question?
Yes.
I saw someone looking. Yeah, Finley.
Finley.
Hi, sorry. Evening, everybody. I'm actually not joining you tasting. I'm sort of living vicariously through everybody else's reaction. So it's a bit of a different one for me. I'm used to tasting as we go. But my question was more a logistics question. How long does it take you to transport your grapes from vine to winery to process them?
Good question. So you saw the map of where our vineyards are and where the winery is. It's from the furthest one is about 15 minutes by tractor.
All right.
There is a winery in Australia, funnily enough, called 10 minutes by tractor, and their rationale is only to source grapes from 10 minutes away from the winery, so it's very local. So it's not all their own vineyards, but they'll buy grapes from other growers, but from a very specific local area. So we're a little bit bigger than them. We're 15 minutes by tractor. There was a time last vintage, the vintage before, where they shut the road underneath the railway lines. We had to go a really long way around through the vineyards, but that was like 25 minutes by tractor. The white and the pink are made mostly from vineyards further down on the plain, and they're made in John Mark's bigger winery down by the sea. So some of those might be travelling half an hour, 40 minutes by tractor or even by lorry. It get loaded onto a lorry and then driven up to the winery. It's very common in Australia to truck grapes, 8, 10, 12 hours by refrigerated truck. Because the facilities for producing wine are quite far away from the vineyards in some cases. But where we are, it's much more local.
We did a wine weekend with wine club members in October in the harvest, and we had a barrel of wine that we picked. We picked all the grapes from the vineyard, transported them in our car and got a flat tire. So that was more like 2.5 hours from vineyard to winery.
That'll add a few hours to the average.
Yeah.
It was just because I couldn't quite tell the distance, so I thought, it'd be interesting to find out. So thank you.
Yep, no, pleasure. Okay, why don't we pour, anyone who's got the rosé, why don't you pour that into your glass now? Any other questions before we start chatting a bit about the rosé? Just get conscious of time. It's about nearly past. We are hoping to make sure we finish well in time for sort of 5 to 8, because it is clap for the NHS later on at 8 o'clock this evening. I don't want to delay anyone being able to make it for that. And I'd love to have a bit of questions at the end. So we'll probably do 5, 6 minutes on each wine and then have a bit of chat at the end, and then leave you to go on your way and get your supper. Instantly, has anyone had supper already? We're late supper eaters, so we'll be eating afterwards. But no, everyone's looking forward to some supper afterwards, which is a good news. But so we won't want to keep you too long.
I think it's gone to my head.
It's gone to your head already. Amanda is the ultimate cheap date. Half a glass of wine, and yeah, she already feels it. Anyway, so I poured myself a glass of rosé. When we started making wines other than our reds, we started with a white. We just thought that was what people would be most interested in. But it rapidly became clear that actually rosé is 10 years ago beginning to be really popular. And now it's just enormously popular and it sells incredibly fast. And we're very lucky with working with Jean-Marc. He's an extraordinarily good rosé producer. So just to refresh your minds, white wine is made from green coloured grapes, white grapes, but they're actually green. You can make white wine from red grapes because the juice of red grapes is almost entirely colourless. Red wine can only be made from red grapes because there's no skin in the colour of a white grape. But rosé wine also can only be made from red grapes, or actually slightly pink coloured grapes. There is an intermediate category of grapes, a bit pink. But the challenge with rosé nowadays is to get the colour level to the right amount. Because if you use red grapes and soak them in the wine for any length of time, it goes really deep red or deep pink. And then you've got a dark, do you remember those pinks of the 90s and the early 2000s, kind of electric pink wines you used to be able to get on the supermarket shelves? That's kind of fallen out of fashion, and everyone's gone for the very delicate and pale coloured Provence style rosé. And so when we started making our rosé, we were definitely looking for grapes and a winemaking style that helped us produce a very, very fine, delicate, pretty pink colour. And I hope that's what we're able to achieve. One of the joys of Grenache as a grape variety is it's not hugely coloured. But we do have a problem. Jean-Marc every year will harvest grapes and pick them and crush them, and the juice is already a little bit too pink for rosé. You're not allowed in rosé making to get white wine and blend a bit of red wine into it. Theoretically, everything has to be made in a rosé style. So what Jean-Marc's very careful now to do is to take various different grapes and make them into rosé of different colours. So he's got some darker coloured rosé and some paler coloured rosé, some almost pale, almost hardly rosé at all rosé, made from these red grapes. And then he can adjust in the blend to get the colour right and balance the flavour as well. So we're looking for, this isn't so much a vineyard wine, this is a wine we're trying to make to hit a spot of drinkability and freshness and a beautiful rosé colour. And that's achieved by having a few different portions to blend from. And it's a real skill of Jean-Marc's to be able to make wine in. He'll pick some grapes very early, so they're really hardly coloured at all and very fresh acidity and zip. And he'll pick some grapes much later, which have got much more richness and fatness and ripeness. And then playing with the fractions to make the blend is where the art is. And he lets us do that with the fractions he's made for his wines, and we produce B pink from that. So essentially, Grenache, red Grenache, a bit of the pink Grenache, the Grenache Gris. It's complicated, isn't it? Grenache Gris means grey Grenache, but the grapes are actually pink coloured. And then a tiny little bit of Syrah, so maybe about 15% Syrah. And that is a darker colour, and that does allow you to touch the colour back up a bit to make it a little bit pinker, because the Grenache can be really, really pale. I hope that what we've achieved is just a lot of thought goes into a wine that gets drunk without a lot of thought being given to it, because it's just refreshing and delicious and a perfect sort of summer garden drink. And I know from the reaction of our club members this year, who are clamouring to buy more, having already bought sort of 6 or 12 bottles, that this is going down really well. We made more than ever this year, and it's already, but it's not sold out, but we made 2,400 bottles. We've got less than 1,000 bottles left, 2 or 3 weeks after we started selling it. So it's going really, really well. I hope that, who's got a glass? Can we have our hands up for who's actually got a glass with them? Tim, Alex, Jessica, Pal, good to see you. Yeah, so some of you, so the rest of you just sort of getting this vicariously. Maria's got a glass, she's got her thumb up. We can't see her picture, but we can just see a thumb. Good. Well, I hope you're all enjoying it. There is more where that came from, but normally we try to produce enough that we can last through the summer. But by September, not many people are drinking rosé in the garden anymore. If we had a nice Indian summer, we can sell a bit of rosé in September. We could sell it through December and into next year, because some people drink rosé all year round. But we definitely think our rosé is a summer rosé, and we try and produce enough so that it's fairly much sold out by September. This year, I think it might sell by the end of July. So if you need some, there is some at the moment, but get in there quick. Good. Look, questions and comments about the rosé. I think it's probably time to move on, because I'm going to suggest we serve these wines in Domaine of the Bee and then Genoux. Genoux is the more expensive wine. It is slightly paler in colour, but I think we'll do Domaine of the Bee first and then Les Genoux. For those of you who've got both bottles, and those of you who just got one bottle with you, then join us in when you can. So,
Use this.
Well, we can nick it, darling, for God's sake. We're in the business for enjoyment. No Prissy spitting out at this stage in the evening. There we go. So we're sharing this bottle. This is the Domaine of the Bee 2016. Now, if you remember, if you've been following us at all, we had this issue with our bottling, and that means we still haven't bottled our 2018 reds. We would normally be selling those now, but we decided to implement the solution for the white and the pink of shipping to the UK and bottling here. But we thought our reds, being barrel aged, could perfectly happily cope with another 2 months in barrel, and we're currently working on an early June date to get those bottled. So we haven't sent out as normal our 2018 reds, but we have enough 2016 for us to fulfill the wine club shipment. People who've got a mixed case will now get a bottle of 2016 Domaine of the Bee in it. And those who take a 6-pack or a 12-pack will have a dozen or a 6-bottle case of this. So this is the one we've just sent out, and I think it's tasting really spot on right now. Let me have a smell. Because you really have got the kind of I remember in my tasting notes I talked a lot about black fruits, but I'm getting a bit more of the red fruit character now. There's a lot of
have to sip it twice.
well, Grenache has a characteristic of tasting quite a lot like strawberries a lot of the time, and normally I've pointed out sort of black plums and things in this wine, but I'm actually right now I'm getting a bit more of the strawberry flavour. And you think on the smell it's going to be quite a fruity, simple wine, but actually when you taste it, it's quite big. It's got a lot of tannin still there. This is a wine for keeping, and there's lots of life ahead of it. It's very young yet. I mean, we released it 2 years ago. Normally our wines, I think, need a good year after we release them to kind of calm down, and then they start drinking, if you like, younger wine, and they last a good 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 years in the bottle. So this is very much at the early stage in its life, but I think it's just rounding off and expressing very nicely. The decanting into baby bottles and a little touch of oxidation has probably helped accelerate that. So there's been a little bit of, like decanting a wine, it's just given a little bit of air, a little bit of life, and it's perhaps a bit more open than it would be if you'd opened a full bottle right now and without any decanting. Mark, question from you.
Yes, no, my very first, when I opened this bottle tonight, my very first sip had like that, a very strong sort of blackberry note, which has almost now sort of like disappeared. But this question about whether you decant or not, quite interested on your views on that. I opened the bottle about half an hour or so before the session tonight, but I didn't decant it. I just left the bottle open under a cloth.
Well, it's a really good question. Have you finished?
No, that's it. That's it.
Okay, well, it's a top question, and one that I think
that's the question.
Yeah. So first of all, you picked up the Blackberry, which I think is a characteristic of the Carignan. So Carignan, of the 2 grapes we have, Grenache and Carignan, if you want to say one fruit for each one, Grenache would probably be strawberries, often a sort of compote jam strawberry rather than a very, very fresh strawberry. Carignan would be blackberry. It's a bramble flavour for me. So this 16 was a really good Carignan year. We produced a really good single varietal Carignan in 16, which we're doing again in 18, incidentally. And then in terms of the decanting, my opinion is that, so there's 2 reasons to decant a wine. One is to remove the wine, the clean wine, from the sediment that's in the bottom of the bottle. And that's only really relevant when you've got an old wine which has thrown a sediment, and you don't want to risk pouring it into lots of people's glass and having the sediment shake up, so the last couple of glasses go very cloudy. So you very gently pour it off the sediment, often over a candle or a light source, so you can see the sediment entering the neck of the bottle. And then you leave the last half glass in the bottom of the bottle. I usually use it to make the gravy when I'm making a roast, just tip it into the gravy, and it's a nice way to finish off the gravy. When you've got a young wine, you don't have any significant sediment. So then the reason for decanting is to aerate the wine a bit. The younger the wine, and the more you're drinking it very early in its drinking window, the more it's going to benefit from that aeration. If it's right at the end of its drinking window, it's really not going to benefit. The aeration, oxidation is a slow process of destruction. Anyone remember the film of She by Ryder Haggard? Do you remember where she's eternally preserved? She's 1,000 years old, this woman. She entices this man into the eternal flame of youth so that he is also eternally preserved. But she doesn't realise that when you go in twice, it reverses it. And she ages 1,000 years before our eyes, which I remember was quite a shock to my 10-year-old self. I remember Hugh Johnson saying once he'd opened a bottle, I forget exactly how old it was a 1720 or something like that. And he said it was absolutely extraordinary for about 15 or 20 seconds. And then it just kind of, it just decayed and went off in front of his eyes. So the reason you don't decant a very old wine too long in advance is you might miss that window when it's delicious. But you do decant very young wines, and you often decant them pouring the wine into a decanter, letting it bubble up with the air so that it's really gaining the oxygen, and that helps it evolve and soften and all those things that a wine needs to do when it's well aged. So decant a young wine is generally a good plan. If you just open the bottle and leave the cork out, it doesn't do very much because you've just got a tiny little disc of wine in contact with a tiny disc of oxygen, and you don't really get much exchange. But if you decant it into a jug or a decanter, you get a lot more oxygenation and you get more of the flavours start to come out. So probably I'd say a young wine like this, I probably would decant it if I was having it for dinner, just to give it an extra chance to express itself.
2 questions.
Yep.
Pal is drinking the 2013, which is lovely and smooth. Can you comment on vintage differences in the last few years, as well as your view on aging potential for Domaine of the Bee?
Great question. One of the joys of being where we are is it is one of the most reliably hot and dry parts of France. So we do get variation in vintages, but we don't get the extreme variation that you get, say, in Bordeaux, which is by the Atlantic, where the Atlantic weather comes across and it can rain really hard during vintage. You can have a lot of more significant vintage variation. Where we have been, the 1 year that was really late and very cool was 2013. So, Paul, that's the wine you're drinking. In 2014, we had a few disease problems because it rained quite a bit during the vintage, but most of the other years have been hot and dry, and it just varies as to when in the summer we get our heat. Normally it's July and August, but 16 was a year where June and July were very hot, and August was really cool. And June and July were so hot that we were thinking that the grapes were going to be ready incredibly quickly because they were just accelerating their ripeness. And then it all cooled down to kind of mid-20s in August, which is, you know, where we are, it's normally mid-30s in August. And it was mid-20s and cloudy and a bit of rain in August, and then that slowed everything down. So we ended up with a long tail to our vintage rather than having this kind of spike of everything ripening at the same time. So the weather does vary. We're very happy that 15, 16, 17 and 18 have all been extremely good vintages. 19 pretty good, but all of them at least 7 out of 10 on the quality scale. And we have to go back to 2014 to have a vintage that was really more like a 5 out of 10 vintage. And the 13, I would say, was more perhaps like a 6 out of 10 vintage, but maybe 8 out of 10 if you like the acidity and the freshness from a lighter style. So it's not as, it's very hard to say there's a simple answer is this vintage was good, because it depends on the region you're in, the grape varieties you've got. But for us, the variation between the vintages has been not too serious, and we've had really good quality. Amanda, who another question here?
Well, it was also the aging potential.
Good question. Yeah. So I did publish a blog post about 2 or 3 years ago, and I probably should do another one to talk about where I think the wines sit. I would say between 2 years after bottling and about 7 or 8 years after bottling is probably the ideal window. We do have wines now from 2007, 2008, which is still tasting, the 7 is probably past its best. The 8, I think, is still tasting really good. So it probably is a bit vintage specific, but if you leave a wine more than 7 or 8 years from us, I think there's a risk in a less good vintage, it starts to go downhill, but in a great vintage, it could last another 5 or 6. So my summary would be 2 to 7 years is probably ideal. But it depends a bit on whether you like wines very fresh and young, in which case drink them young, or you love that mature style that you get with an older wine, in which case leave them. But yeah, that would be my summary.
So Konstantinos says that when he tried Domaine of the Bee 2016, I noticed smokiness and notes of spices. Have you used any oak treatment?
Good question. Thanks, Konstantinos. Yes, we ferment our wines in open 500-litre barrels, which means we take out one of the ends. We take the hoops off. That means the staves splay apart. We can lift out the head. We then put the hoops back on again. So you've got a waterproof barrel. We then load the grapes into the barrel. We tip them in baskets, sometimes stomp on them a bit, sometimes put some stems in, ferment in the barrel. And then when the wine's finished and pressed, we put it into a temporary barrel, recooper the original barrel, and then put the wine back into that barrel. We normally end up with about 8 to 10 barrels of wine. And we normally buy 2 or maybe 3 barrels new. So we end up with roughly 1/3 to 1/4 of our barrels are brand new every year. And so you get some oak flavour. The new barrels definitely give you a strong oak flavour. The 1-year-old barrels give you a milder oak flavour. 2-year-old barrels, you can still tell a little bit of oak flavour. once the barrels are 3 years old, have been used 3 times, there's not much flavour coming out. You're using the barrel really as a storage vessel. So typically we would have about a third to a quarter of new barrels. And depending on which cuvee we've got, whether it's Les Genoux or Domaine of the Bee or the B-side, will dictate which wine gets the new barrels. But normally we'd have a third or so of the Domaine of the Bee would have a new barrel, and maybe one of the 2 or 3 barrels that goes into Les Genoux would be a new barrel.
I think you need to move on.
Yeah, time-wise, we're moving on. So we've probably got 7 or 8 more minutes. Let's move on to Les Genoux, because I think the time has come. Finish your glass, Amanda. Poor girl. So we're having a bottle of Genoux, which is 2015. Now, those of you who have seen our emails recently, we sent out a slightly panicky email in March, I think, to say we're a little bit worried about this COVID situation. Some of our restaurant customers are no longer buying, and some of them who have bought are having trouble paying their bills. We've got a lot of expensive labels and bottles to buy that we need to pay for in actually about May. We really need your help because we're going to run out of money if we don't have a bit of help. We had an amazing response. It was absolutely incredible. We had in 2 weeks, we did more business than we'd done in January, February, March put together the previous year, which was fantastic. And one of the negatives of that is it's cleaned us out of a lot of the wines that we'd normally like to have a bit of stock of. So our Genoux has been pummeled. And because we haven't shipped our 2018 Genoux yet, and we gave all our wine club members and people who were on the Genoux plan, the 15 and the 17 Genoux, we pretty much cleaned out everything we had left. And so I have only got, I don't know, 12 or 15 bottles of each left in my cellar. That's my sort of private, well, when we do a future tasting of the Les Genoux verticals, they'll come from my stock.
Your
So,
stock.
the business's stock. But we've got very few bottles left of these wines. So this is the last of, I forget how many we made in 15, but 900 bottles or so. And I hope you agree it's tasting lovely. It's really opened out. So it can be quite tight when it's young and doesn't reveal a huge amount. But right now, you definitely got that aged character. There's some flavors of. We grow figs in our vineyard, and some of the figs taste absolutely spectacularly delicious. And sometimes you get a fig that's gone slightly dry, you get a sort of dried fig character, which I think this one's displaying. And it has some of the characters of an old Burgundy. A slightly odd observation, because we're right in the south of France, we're 15% alcohol. It's quite a long way away from Burgundy, but Grenache, which is the grape that makes up the majority of Genoux, sometimes called the Pinot Noir of the South. And it does have, as well as relatively low tannins and lots of bright, expressive, feminine, soft fruit. I can't use the word feminine anymore.
No, you can't.
What we used to call feminine, but can't anymore, soft fruit. That is actually quite reminiscent to Pinot Noir. And I think one of the joys of wine, people in the wine business who love their wine, rhapsodize about old Pinot Noir. And I think this is just starting to display some of those characteristics. So what do you think of this?
Tim's asking if it's Grenache.
Yeah, so the vineyard I showed you that we zoomed in on, those vines where there's a lot of gaps in the vineyard. This is a 100-year-old vineyard. It's what's known as a field blend, which means it's made from whatever grows in the vineyard. And those vines vary. So one vine is not the same as the next vine. But roughly speaking, 70% of those vines are black Grenache. And then another 15% are Carignan. And then the remaining 15% are white and pink Grenache, and a little bit of white Carignan and some Muscat and some other odd varieties that just grow alongside the main ones. So it's mostly Grenache, and most of the Grenache is red Grenache. Part of the influence of these 15% of grapes that are pink or white means it's a slightly paler colour, and there is more complexity than just a 100% pure Grenache. But yes, that is the major grape variety.
And then the other question was, would you be able to talk briefly about B-side Grenache?
Yes, I would. So Jacob, that's one of your questions. Thanks for that. So B-side we made for the first time in 2014, where we had this really difficult year, and we just decided the wine wasn't good enough. None of the wine blended together quite equal what Domaine of the Bee should be in a good year. So we agonized about it for a long time, and we tasted, and I basically decided the Carignan wasn't up to scratch, and so I asked Jean-Marc if he wanted to buy it at the bulk price, which meant we lost a lot of money. It cost us a lot of money to grow it and make it, and we sold it for about a third of what it cost us. But the Grenache we really loved, and we thought it was delicious. It was actually the Grenache that would have been Les Genoux Grenache if we thought it was good enough, but we decided it was actually a level below what it should be. So we bottled it as the B-side. And that first year, the 14 was so popular that we thought we can't not do it again. So 15, we had a lovely Grenache year, lots of good Grenache. So we used half of our own Grenache fruit with the lighter barrels, and we asked Jean-Marc if he would supply a couple of barrels of his own Grenache. And so we blended them together and produced the B-side 15. We skipped it in 16 because that was a Carignan year. We had not enough Grenache, couldn't make it in 16, but we made it again in 17. And I think 17 is the best one we've made, even better than the 14. And I'm quite excited about the 18, which is coming along as well, which again is actually this time about 75% our own barrels, the lighter barrels. We even bled some of our barrels to almost make a rosé style of very pale Grenache and put that in a barrel on its own. And we've used that in this wine as well. So we've ended up with the 18 Grenache will have some sort of almost like a dark rosé blended with some of the reds to make what I think is a very, very good wine. So that is how we make the B-side. And I think value for money wise, it's extremely good.
Right, there's a couple of things here. To Charlie, yes, Les Genoux is because it's the bee's knees, so you're quite right. Then there's a lovely comment here from Mark who says, you know how when you go blackberrying, each blackberry you taste is just a little bit different, from dark and musty to sweet and sharp, but nevertheless, God, I've drunk too much wine, nevertheless recognizable as a blackberry. Well, the first mouthful of B 2016 this evening was just like that platonic ideal of a blackberry, just for a moment. I love that.
No, that's very philosophical, and thank you for that. I love the platonic ideal. I love that anything can approach the platonic ideal, which is theoretically kind of impossible. It's sort of
just for a moment.
Just for a moment. Just for a moment in your mind.
The guy agrees.
That's nice to know. Thank you.
Konstantinos wants to know if the winery is open for visitors.
Again, very good question, Konstantinos. So we live in London. We have a house there, and I am there probably 12 weeks a year. And I'm there during the vintage time, and we're normally there in the summer for 3 weeks or so. And periodically in the early summer, we pop out for weekends and a week here and there. The winery itself is Jean-Marc's winery. It's called Chateau Saint-Roch, and he has opened it in the summer, but I'm not sure he does it on an ongoing basis because it's a region that doesn't have a lot of tourists, and you can have a cellar door. It's not in a village, it's not on a main road. So he's not in the ideal place to get the passing traffic. And he's found when he has opened it for July and August that actually 1 or 2 people a day have come. So the answer is, if you want to come, get in touch. If you're in the region, anytime I will be able to arrange something for you. If I'm there, we'll certainly host you and drive you around the vineyards and open a couple of bottles for you and show you the winery. If I'm not there, I should be able to pass you on to a couple of friends in the region who do have wineries and who are there all the time. Someone like Katie Jones or Richard Case or even Jean-Marc himself. A lot of people out there would be very happy to host you. So if you want to visit the region, just ask me, just send me an email. I'll be totally happy to put you in touch with the right people. And if I'm there, I'd love to see you and open some bottles for you.
Yeah. And I think Fleur has been brilliant and responded in the chat to a question about whether Grenache is also commonly used in northern Spain, which yes, it is.
Yeah, so Grenache is a grape. Actually, Grenache and Carignan are both grapes that probably originated in northern Spain, and a lot of the regions in Priorat itself, or Calatayud, or the northern Spanish areas, and even Rioja have quite a high proportion of Grenache. And there's a region called Carignan, which is the Spanish name for Carignan. So yes, they're Pyrenean grapes, and we definitely benefit from being on the northern side of the Pyrenees, and both grapes to be celebrated. I think we probably need to wind up at this point. It is 5:02, and you have suppers to go to, and we'll shortly be banging our pots and pans outside. I just want to say thank you so much for your engagement and your questions and your alert faces. I haven't seen anyone I've noticed looking at their phones or
but 2 have gone.
Drifting away. A couple of people have gone, but I really enjoyed it. I appreciate your time, and let's do it again sometime. Definitely, one of the things I'm planning is a vertical of Domaine of the Bee, so let's go back to well, I don't know how many bottles you'd like in a set. I think 6 is probably at the maximum end of what we should taste, something like this. Maybe 4, 5 or 6 is probably the right number. I'll specify some wines I think will show the range quite nicely, and we'll publicise a vertical of Domaine of the Bee, and hopefully do that with 20 or 30 of you at some point. We'll probably do another one of these where we just show the range of our current wines to a different group. If you wanted it again, you're welcome, but we're trying to evangelise to new people. If you have friends who'd be interested, or you want to gather a group of other people who don't know us together, we'd love that. But keep an eye on your emails. We'll do this again and hopefully see you over a glass or two another time.
Thanks,
Thanks very
guys.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely seeing you.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening, everybody.
Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.